are they? Well, this article was really basically about Google, right? And it was the first article to talk about how Google was a prototype of a large-scale search engine. Today, Google has come to such an extent that everyone here uses this as a verb. So I thought it was very interesting and crucial to share with you on scholarly publishing and how the process really is like. This is something very, very crucial. So by working together with all of our collaborators and partners, we receive over 2 million article submissions every single year. So many people will be saying, you receive over 2 million, but just exactly how many articles do you publish? Because Elsevier rejects articles all the time. And my answer to that is, well, we don't really reject all the time. We reject probably maybe 75% of the time. And people get, wow, the rejection rate is so high. How is it that you go about doing this? And part of the reason is very simple. We place a very, very stringent emphasis on the quality of the articles that are accepted. And if you think about it, a rejection rate of 75% of 2 million articles would mean that we are publishing 500,000 articles every single year. And this is actually a very significant amount. How we are actually able to do this is because we have over 500 employees in publishing. We facilitate scholarly communications by organizing editorial boards. We launch new subscription and open access journals. We are running a very large number of active journals, up to 2,800. We coordinate with over 400,000 reviewers, and we promote up to 600,000 authors. And we are able to do this because we have over 7 million author-publisher communications every single year. And why we spend so much time on this is quite simple. So 2 years back, I met with this editor from the University of Amsterdam, and he shared with me that one of the key things that he does is to spend a lot of time identifying the best peer reviewer in that specific subject area so that they can actually best handle the manuscripts in the best possible way. So they have to be subject matter experts. They need to be able to improve an article by suggesting the correct corrections, the best corrections, how they can augment the article better. And this is something that Elsevier editors really spend a lot of time doing. And as a result, we are able to produce up to 500,000 new articles over every single year. The content is tagged for discoverability, their content enriched with interactive graphs, and we can see rigorous quality control processes in place. We provide access, training, and support for over 16 million monthly users, for over 4,500 institutions across 180 countries. And this allows us to maintain the article recommender algorithm. We are able to constantly improve the ScienceDirect platform. We ensure the availability of 16 million digital articles with a performance uptime of 99%. Some of the journals that you now see on ScienceDirect would include very famous titles like Cell, Lancet, Tetrahedron, Chemical Physics Letters, BBA General Subjects. Lancet is producing a very huge amount of research on COVID-19, and you'll be able to find research on COVID-19 available for you to read as well. And this is something, of course, I understand is a pressing concern in the world right now. One of the books that you might find really familiar here, or to a certain age group that is, would be this book called Grey's Anatomy. So this tells everyone how old I really am, because I grew up watching that TV series. And no, the journal was not actually named after that TV series, but rather it was the other way around. They decided to actually get the name of the CBS series from one of our journal titles. And this is actually where you're here for, right? You don't want me to talk about history. You really want to find out what are the steps that you need to take before writing a paper. So this goes on to many different ways, and I would always encourage people to first and foremost always think through what is it and what's the intent for you to do your research, right? First and foremost, let me tell you 10 tips on how you can write a really terrible journal article. So the takeaway of this is, please don't do any of this, right? Not reading the previous literature that was published in your field, taking the lazy way out and to plagiarize, omit key article components, disrespecting previous contributions, publications, overestimating your contribution to the field of research, by being ambiguous and inconsistent, by not being very clear in the information you're trying to share and to disseminate. When you apply an incorrect reference with regards to statements, when you prefer subjective to over objective statements, when you care little about grammar, spelling, figures, and tables, and when you ignore editor and reviewer comments. So these are the 10 things that we really encourage everyone to please not do. And one of our editors, Bert Blocken, has highlighted some of the major mistakes early career researchers have made when they're preparing and submitting a manuscript to a scientific journal. So this is called 10 tips for writing a truly terrible journal article. It is something that I would constantly emphasize, please don't do, and it's one of the things that you should be aware of. So the other thing which I need to, having established that, the other thing you should know is to determine if you are ready to publish. You should only consider publishing if you have information which advances understanding in a very specific research field, right? So first and foremost, you need to ask yourself, am I presenting new original results or methods? Am I rationalizing, refining, or to reinterpret published results? If I'm doing a review or a summary of a particular subject or field, right? So you need to ask yourself that if one, your article and your research has slightly incorrect conclusions, if there's a duplication with regards to established work, if you find that your work is slightly outdated, then maybe you are not quite ready yet to actually get your work to be published. On the other hand, you need to factor in, if my work is an up-to-date review of a subject or field, if there is a significant enhancement of published work, if there is actually original results or methods, then maybe my work is ready to advance the current field yet, right? So you need to factor all this in first before you can ascertain if you are ready to publish. Often, people would also ask, how do I choose the correct journal for me to publish? My colleague Johan will go down in this and to talk about more details on how you can use data to establish this information. But so first and foremost, what I can share with you first is on the Elsevier.com, under Science Direct, you find all our journals, and then you'll be able to ascertain what the aims and scope of a journal is. Always make sure that you are able to identify what's the aim and scope of a journal, so you can determine if that's the best medium for you to share your research. You need to see what type of articles they accept, rather they are accepting, if they are accepting journal articles or reviews or conference proceedings, right? That's a very basic thing to be aware of. You need to see what type of recently published articles the journal itself is also producing, to see if that aligns with the trend of your work. And then lastly, you have references in your own article, which often lead you to your own correct journal of choice. So there's quite a multitude of factors to note out for before you can actually considering publishing in the correct journal. One thing I would say multiple times is please do not submit your manuscripts to more than one journal at a time. I'm going to be slightly of a nag to emphasize this across the session itself, but please make sure when you're submitting your manuscript, submit it to only one journal at once. Because if you were to submit it to multiple journals, this is actually unethical. And for instance, assume what happens if your article gets accepted by both journals. You will have to retract both, and this is a terrible thing. So make sure that you're choosing one journal correctly and to submit it for the first time of your choice. So let's talk about how actually a journal is actually organized from the start. So there are a couple of key people that you should know when it comes to management of a journal. The editor of a journal, the sub-editors of a journal, the editorial board, the advisory board, and the publishers. This is actually how a journal is mostly organized, and then you need to ascertain the aims and scope and the quality of a journal, which I'll go on in more detail subsequently. So first, what are the responsibilities of an editor? People tend to conflate editors and publishers, but they do two completely different things, right? So the editor is responsible for scientific quality. He's a subject matter expert, obviously, of the field. He has to be an established person in the area, and he or she should be very, very aware of what's going on. They are responsible for the scientific quality, they need to check the paper, and they are able to decide which papers get published. Crucially, the editor is the one responsible for coordinating the peer review process. He or she would have to identify who are the best people to conduct the peer review, so that firstly, after they do a check, they can submit the manuscript to a group of experts called the peer reviewers, who will be able to put in their comments and corrections and feedback to improve the article. They would have to communicate then with the authors and the reviewers. So in a way, they project manage the entire process so people understand what is going on and what's the communication. Together with the publisher, they define the aims and scope of the journal. And they're the ones who advise on the strategy and the direction for which the journal is heading in. He or she is usually a professor at an esteemed university, but one thing we should say is that there's very rarely one single editor at a journal, especially an international journal, and they really have to work together with a team of editors. The editorial board member is slightly different. The members are appointed by publishers and editors, and they are experts in a subfield of the journal. Members can be consulted when needed, and they're sometimes involved in the entire review process. The editorial board advises on topics for special issues and review papers. They would advise on the strategy and the future direction of the journal, and they represent the authors and the readers of the journal. So, what are the responsibilities of a publisher then? What do publishers do? How does Elsevier contribute? So, over here at Elsevier, we provide the overall management of a journal. We work together with editors, we provide the editorial infrastructure. So over at Elsevier, we have what we call an EES system, the Elsevier Editorial Service, right, system. So it's a platform where editors are able to go through Scopus data, for instance, and they are able to identify who are the best peer reviewers in the field. They will then be able to reach out to these peer reviewers through their emails. They will send their manuscripts over to them, and then the peer reviewers will be able to get back to the editor if they are able to do the job and if they are able to make the corrections necessary. Publishers would then have to arrange for the publication of accepted manuscripts, right? So once the manuscripts are accepted, we typecast them, we will make sure that it's in the correct format, we put it online digitally. And this is when we can distribute and promote the journal to readers and to libraries itself, right? We'd have to tag electronically and archive all the published articles so that this research is maintained for posterity. You would be able to go back to a long time like 1970s, 1989, like the chemistry research that I showed you, so that you're able to find digital repositories of all this historical research that has been done, right? Because research is not just only on present, it's also where you're able to build on the shoulder of giants before in the past as well. So you're able to find and tell and understand how research has really evolved and along the way as well. Publishers, of course, would have to deal with ethical and copyright issues. This is something I'll talk about later as well. And it can be very, very complicated, which is why publishers, as a third party, not directly involved in the entire research cycle itself, are very important to moderate and to be a referee of sorts. And publishers would also have to appoint editors and the editorial board. So how do publishers actually add value to the scientific and health community? First and foremost, this is where we monitor the registration. So by being not directly involved in academia, when, for instance, if two research teams working on, say, an area in COVID-19, they are racing to be the first one to provide the vaccine, how are you able to ascertain who showed the result first, right? So publishers have the mandate, and they have in a way, this very, very heavy role of monitoring the timestamp to note who submitted the scientific results first. So no one can be accused of plagiarism per se, right? It's all refereed, it's all moderated. There's a clear overview in terms of who actually has been the first one to cross the finishing line, which is why registration is so crucial. Certification is crucial because we have to perform the peer review to ensure the validity and the integrity of submissions. We provide the dissemination process to provide a medium for discoveries and for findings to be shared. We have to preserve the minutes and the record of science for posterity, and providing a platform where readers and users are able to use the information for their own research. So publishers have to go through registration, the certification, the dissemination, the preservation of records, as well as the use of it. The editorial process selects suitable articles for publication to publish the papers in a single format. And the key step here, like I mentioned before, is the peer review process. So why is the peer review process so crucial? Firstly, it's an essential filter to separate science from speculation and to determine the scientific quality. Because how is anyone to know if a research area is fabricated? It needs to be opened to the research ecosystem. People are able to ascertain if the results are accurate or otherwise. Publishers have also ensured the sustainability of journals and the peer review system for over 300 years. They stand outside the academic process and they're not prone to prejudice or to favor, because this is the most important way of representing the impartiality of the whole situation. It needs to determine the validity, the significance, and the originality of the research at hand. The peer review process also helps to improve the quality of the paper. So suggestions can come in at any time to improve how a research can be more robust. How can the messaging be clearer? How can we tell this story over to the readers in a better way? So this helps to protect the author's work and the claim to authorship as well. So the process is quite straightforward. Generally, editors can do a first check with regards to topic, language, and completeness, and they are also allowed to reject it at desk. After the initial check, they will then send this out for review, usually to a few referees. The review process would take approximately about several weeks, and most of you would know that sometimes this takes actually a bit longer. And I would say this is completely understandable when it comes to the review process, because sometimes peer reviewers may reject it for the first time. Secondly, sometimes they may just pull out after 2 weeks. Thirdly, peer reviewers may be very, very busy and they may not be able to reply back on time. And we have a section on this later that I'll share with you with regard to this. Many invited reviewers may sometimes decline invitation, adding on to review times, which is why sometimes the length for a peer review may be slightly longer than expected. Sometimes it can be that the area is so niche that there are very little peer reviewers in the area as well. All this would add to the review times. The editor will receive the referee reports and then he makes a decision based on them. And in case of doubt, they may consult another referee or to review it themselves. It is only then that the editor can inform the author that yes, congratulations, your article has finally been published. I thought it would make sense to share with you one flowchart so that you can have an overview of the peer review process. Firstly, the author would have to submit the manuscript. The editor would then screen it accordingly to see if the article is of a good enough standard. If the article is not good enough standard, then this is what we call a desk rejection, when the article is rejected. We have over here a reviewer comments, right? Editor would screen it and then he submits the article for the reviewer to take a look at it. The editor would access the reviews and then the author can make revisions based on it. And it's only then when the article is either rejected or if the article is then published, right? So it's a very straightforward process. The problem with here is that sometimes the timing in between might take a bit longer than expected. So when papers are rejected, the author may then submit to another journal. Remember I was telling you and talking about how you can only subscribe to one journal at one point in time? This is one of the reasons. It's advisable then to improve the manuscript based on the comments from editors and the reviewers. So you need to take a very proactive, a very agile approach to really improve yourself, to improve the research that you're producing. When papers are then accepted but revisions are required, you can then improve the manuscript according to comments from editors and from reviewers. After acceptance, manuscripts are typeset based to journal requirements, and then manuscripts can be available online firstly as uncorrected proofs, and then to corrected proofs, accepted manuscripts, and then final print. Proofs are returned to the author and the editor for corrections, and it's only after corrections that the paper is fully published, it's fully citable, you can share the link with your peers, and then you can start collecting your citations. So how can you want to develop and to submit a manuscript? So once again, I'll boil down to your purpose for your research. You need to ascertain what type of manuscript you're planning in the first place. And there are 3 key types of manuscripts, broadly speaking. One are full articles. Secondly, letters or short communications. Thirdly, review papers. Ask yourself, when it comes to full articles, you need to ask yourself, is my message sufficient for a full article? Because full articles have to be substantial, they have to be complete research and comprehensive pieces of research so that you're able to actually deliver and to flesh out your new original research in detail. And then later you need to also understand if you want to publish letters or short communications, right? You need to understand quick and early communications might sometimes be a good way for you to deliver information. You need to decide if the results are so thrilling that they should be shown as soon as possible. Sometimes this is when you may want to actually use and to leverage on letters or communications. Thirdly, review papers themselves are summaries of recent development on a specific topic, and they're often submitted by invitation. So you can do a longitudinal study, right? Perhaps of a specific area after a period of times, so that you can decide if you can give a good overview of a subject area. And this is a point where I think preparation is really important. You need to understand it's kind of like accruing the information which is required for you to start writing. So use the right process to write a paper. Firstly, collect the elements of a paper first. You want to prepare an outline to start writing a first draft. Determine what is the central message you're trying to tell, what is the central research question you're trying to tackle, right? So you're able to articulate this over so that your readers understand what is it you're trying to do. You can then prepare the draft versions of plots, figures, tables, and images. This is when you can actually start getting all these data sets and start putting it together. Summarize the main findings and group them in a logical way, and then select the references that you're using. But notice one thing, this is first step, right? Prepare an outline, collect the elements. Now write the first draft. Write it with the outlines, figures, and tables as your guide. So write it in your own style, quickly and without editing. You may not want to care about language quality at this point in time. So the reason for you doing this is that so that you're able to maintain an idea of what's the message you're trying to tell. You're able to articulate the flow in the most organic way for you as well, right? You may not, whether or not you want to care about language quality, I'll leave it up to you. This is a personal approach, right? So everyone would have their own methodology with regard to this. But now this is a part where you want to read the first draft and then to add notes. You want to read this as a critical reader and not as an author, right? Ask yourself, is the message which I'm reading from this research article clear? Is it clear to myself? Do I understand what is it that I'm writing about? Is my answers and my findings understandable? Ask yourself all these questions first. Be a very, very critical reader of this. Then use the right process to write the paper, rewrite and improve. Read the text, revise the text, improve the order and the logic of the scientific content, identify gaps and to improve the unclear parts which you think have not been fleshed out properly. You probably want to remove double redundant text. This is something that happens all the time to everyone, right? How do you keep it short and sweet? You want to optimize the readability. You want it to be clear, concise in short sentences. You want to correct the language errors to make sure that there's no grammatical errors. And this is something that most most editors actually take a lot of particular care in. I'll talk about this later on as well. Ask yourself, is the text clear and consistent, which is really important when multiple authors write the text. And you need to get feedback from co-workers and colleagues to see if your article at the moment is of a good enough standard. So always make sure you're able to leverage on community with people that you really trust to be able to do this and to give you constructive feedback. So the next part is, how do I ensure that I'm using proper manuscript language? First and foremost, a very common question people ask is, do publishers correct language free of charge? And I'll say no. Sadly, no. It's really the author's responsibility to make sure that your paper is in the best possible form when you're submitting it for publication. Publishers often provide resources for authors who are less familiar with the conventions for international journals. So check with your publisher's author website for more information. Some publishers may perform technical screening prior to the peer review. So over at Elsevier, we have a web shop for translation and language editing services. So this is something that you may want to check out, webshop.elsevier.com. This is something which we do, right? We help to edit proper American or British English by native speakers who are mostly PhD candidates. They're the ones who actually complete all of the work within 4 to 7 business days. And if you have a pressing deadline, then with an express service, the prices range from $115 or more, right? So my job here is not to promote this. My job here is to tell you that this exists, but I'm not here to sell you. If you really want to leverage on this web shop exists. Okay, but what I can help you, for instance, is information like manuscript language. So let's talk about tenses first. It's a basic building block for all language, and we always talk about it when we're young, growing up as students. So first and foremost, the use of tenses is very, very crucial. When it comes to the abstract and summary, it has to be written in past tense. Why? Because the abstract summarizes what has been done. The summary also puts in question what you have managed to achieve with regards to your research. Introduction talk is written in present tense, interestingly, well, or maybe not interestingly, but logically speaking, because it's talking about an existing research query that you have at hand. Yeah. So use the present tense to write about this so that you're able to talk about what is the problem that you're trying to resolve as of the moment. Talk about methods and materials and the results and this is written in past tense because you're talking about the methods you have applied, materials which you have used, and the results which you have obtained, right? Then talk about the discussion. Talk about both past tense and present tense which you're using it because you want to talk about what has been done, what has been achieved, and how we can proceed on with this. When it comes to writing your sentences, make sure it's direct and short. Long sentences confuse readers. I'll give examples later. Short sentences look more professional. The average length of a sentence in scientific writing is approximately 12 to 17 words. And it's crucial because what you want to deliver one idea or piece of information per sentence so that people can digest this information at a time. Too many statements in one sentence may confuse readers. It may obfuscate what it is they're trying to understand. So make it short and sweet. So I always say this, like keep it short and sweet. Everyone knows the acronym KISS, right? So avoid jargon or complicated words and sentence construction. When you have a choice of words, choose the simpler version. Use rather than utilize, spend rather than expenditure, need rather than necessity. For instance, people understand this better. One thing I would say is please omit phrases and words such as already stated, it has been found that, it has long been known that, it is interesting to note that, it is worth mentioning at this point, it may be said that, however, nevertheless, despite the fact that. If you think about it, all these words have been a lot of words, but very little factual content. Please take it away. People always say, how can we keep our research to 10,000 words or less or slightly more? How do we keep within the word limit? If you have all these words in your research itself, a lot of it is bloat. You don't need this. You can put this away or truncate it, and you find that your research message is more concise, is more to the point, it's clear, right? So, for instance, this article, we tracked several colonies of honeybees to see how far they travel to food. The honeybees flew up to 25 meters, right? Okay, I've talked quite a fair bit right now, but I want to make sure that all of you are following me. I know there's some questions and answers at this point in time, right? But I want to make sure that we are active together in this. So I'm going to give you maybe about 8 minutes, right? Because it's about 3:17 right now. So by 4:25, 3:25, take a look at all these statements and find out how would you want to make these sentences shorter, right? So for instance, they are actively addressing the problem, are in process of planning a series of tutorials. The speaker reminded us thrice of the fact that he has been studying nanoparticles for the past 15 years. We estimated as much as 12 to 18% of interspecies differences in gene expression levels might be explained, at least in part, by changes in DNA methylation patterns. All this are rather long, but let's just try and find a way to make it compact. So I'll give you maybe about 8 minutes starting now.
Ya, Bapak Ibu, jadi kita sedikit bermain game. Di sini ada, kita mungkin terbiasa ya kalau kita berbahasa Indonesia, sifatnya menjadi kalimat yang cukup panjang. Nah, di sini silakan Bapak Ibu mungkin bisa mencoba latihan, kira-kira kalau mendapatkan kalimat seperti ini, nah dalam bahasa Inggris itu kalau dipersingkat seperti apa. Ya, jadi nanti bisa dicoba, kemudian nanti bisa diberikan di bagian chatting ya untuk jawaban Bapak Ibu. Kita berikan waktu sekitar 6-7 menit ya untuk mencoba latihan mempersingkat kalimat-kalimat ini. Terima kasih. So they're going to put the answers into the chat box. Nick? Okay.
The chat box should be for Q&A. For your answers, I would say please write it down in a paper beside you or a notepad beside you, and then I'll go through the answers subsequently because I won't be able to review all 700 answers that are coming in because we want to make sure the chat box itself is to handle questions and answers that you have later on. Okay. So apologies, by the way, if I was speaking too fast. I will try my best to slow down a little bit.
Ya, Bapak Ibu silakan mencoba mungkin di selembar kertas atau saat ini membuka laptop bisa dicoba di Word ya. Terus nanti mungkin bisa kira-kira melihat ya hasil dari jawaban Bapak Ibu jika dibandingkan dengan we'll show the answer key after this, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
We will do just that.
Oke, jadi nanti bisa dibandingkan dengan answer key yang akan di-sharing.
Addressing the problem and problem in the process of planning a series tutorial. The speaker remind us 3 different times.
We have some really good questions that have been coming up during the course of the session itself, and thank you so much. We'll do our best to address some of these questions to the best possible way that we can subsequently, so not to worry. Yeah, you have to give me some time to digest them because some of them are actually very intricate, and I'll try my best to answer your questions.
Addressing other problem in process planning.
So thank you so much for your participation in this. It's really good, and I see a lot of good answers from you. So one thing I would say is there is no fixed answer per se, but what I would say is that it's more or less on the approach, on the questions, on how you structure the sentence. So first and foremost, if you ask yourself, they are actively addressing the problem and are in process of planning a series of tutorials, you need to ask yourself, what are the necessary words? You don't need actively, you don't need are in process. So they are addressing the problem and planning a series of tutorials. Short and sweet. Second one would be the speaker reminded us 3 different times of the fact that he has been studying nanoparticles for the past 15 years. So you don't need remind different times of the fact that he has been studying nanoparticles for the past 15 years, because this was already retrospective. So you can just say the speaker reminded us thrice that he has been studying nanoparticles for 15 years. The other one we're talking about is we estimated that as much as 12 to 18%, depending on the tissue, of interspecies differences in gene expression levels might be explained at least changes eaten. Think and make it short. We don't need estimated as, we don't need as much as, we don't need a range, we don't need depending on the tissue, we don't need might be or at least in part. And then we can just restructure the flow of the sentence entirely. Differences in DNA methylation could explain 12 to 18% of gene expression differences, right? So all these are examples that we can write to make this short and sweet and to the point. So some of you have come up with very good answers. You don't need this. Ensure that you're on the right track. So this is great. So I don't think we need to go through all these exercises, but just to drum it in, right? Just to get the cadence and the flow going. Let's talk about simplify. This is a procedure that is often used. This procedure is often used. These approaches uses different kinds of methodology. These approaches use different methods. There are 7 steps that must be completed. 7 steps must be completed. This is a problem that is, your article needs to have a title. You need to have your authors. You need to talk about the abstract of your article you're talking about and the keywords. This is the header of the article. And it's only when it comes to the main text that you can see IMRAD, right? Or some versions will be IMRDC. Some of you have gotten that combination correct. So I would say then there's also the tail end of the article where you can see the acknowledgements, the references, and supplementary material. A quick review of the question has talked about what is supplementary material. We can talk about this later. So let's talk about the article structure. And my colleagues from Europe also use the same image of a fish, you know. There is the head of the fish, which is a title, the abstracts, and the keywords. Why is this important? Because when you're writing your article, you want to make sure that your article is easy to be indexed and for it to be searched, so that it's informative, it's attractive, and it's effective, you know. Then it comes to the main text, right? IMRAD, introductions, methods, results, and discussions, right? Or conclusions. You want to make your article as concise as possible when it comes to this. And then the tail end talks about the conclusion, the acknowledgement for your work, the references that you have used, and any supplementary data that you may have used on. So I'm going to ask you guys a quick question here, right? It might be a bit of a trick question. Once again, use the quiz, the chat box, and I'm going to ask you, when you're writing your article structure, how do you write it? Do you write with the title, abstract keywords first, then the conclusion, introduction, then you talk about the body with the methods, results, and discussion, and then the figures and tables? What is the flow that you would write your article in? You guys are great. You guys are absolutely brilliant. I love you guys. This is correct. Some of you have come up with saying that please use the data first. And I would say yes, because at the end of the day, when you're writing your research, the title, abstract, and keywords is in a way a summary and a header and an advertisement of your research. But the flesh of your research fundamentally still needs to come from the data, right? Before you actually write anything, you always need to review what is the data, what is the your research, what is the fruit of your research. Start from there first. Start figures and tables from your data. Then you can use your methods to apply onto this data, right? And then you can understand what's the results and the discussion that's occurring at this point in time. So start from a bottom up point. Figures, data first. Talk about the method, the results, and then discuss about this. Then you can flesh it out. What is the introduction? Why have you started doing this research? Talk about the conclusion, which is what has structure your article. So I'm going to start from a top-down perspective when you are reading the article to give you more context on why the article flow is that way. So this is not about writing the article, not the step of writing your article, but more of what it is like when you're reading an article and how you're able to ascertain whether the article is a good enough research or otherwise. First and foremost, the title itself has to be interesting, it has to be concise, it has to be informative, right? It needs to be accurate for use in indexing systems and databases so that we can allow potential readers to judge your paper. So some journals would encourage declarative titles, but descriptive titles remain the norm. What is example of a declarative title? Selective elimination of a messenger RNA prevents an incidence of untimely meiosis, right? So you can see selective and untimely, that's declarative. But maybe you want to be more descriptive, right? Mechanisms of DNA translocation in the replicative hexameric helicus. This is more straight to the point. You may also want to delete trivial phrases such as notes on, a study of, and titles which end with a question mark are seldom acceptable. So for instance, right, let's simplify this and see how many citations you can lose or get when people read your title. Effects of a 367 kilojoules of heat on avian protein encapsulated in CaCO3 in the presence of H2O. What do you think this title really means? So for those of you who are staring at this and wondering what it is, and I think some of you probably know, it's really basically about the impact of hard boiling in a chicken egg, right? Because there's avian protein in CaCO3, which is a shell composition. So sometimes, being too descriptive might lose you the audience that you're trying to capture as well. So you need to strike a very fine balance. How do you write a title that's engaging and at the same time very matter of fact? You need to strike a very clean, very fine balance between both. So let me give you an example on this as well. Let's take a look at this original title, right, which is the preliminary observation on the effects of zinc element on the anti-corrosion of zinc plating layer. What is the effects? Then we can just simply revise it because this article is a bit too long. We see preliminary observations. We don't need that. We can just simply say the effects of zinc on the anti-corrosion of zinc plating layer. The long title will distract readers. You want to remove redundancies such as studies on, the nature of, so don't use expressions such as preliminary. You want to be precise. Another example, the action of antibiotics on bacteria. Maybe that's a bit too short, right? Then it comes to the revised title, The Inhibition of Growth of Mycobacterium tuberculosis by Streptomycin. And sometimes you need to ask yourself, you want to be very specific, you need to ask yourself, if I am the researcher and if I'm the reader, how will I search for a particular piece of research? Ask yourself these questions when you're structuring the title. So in this case, I'm interested in antibiotics, specifically Mycobacterium tuberculosis, right? At the same time, that's the bacteria, sorry. At the same time, if I'm thinking about the antibiotics, I'll be looking for streptomycin. Then maybe this is the point where you'll be able to come across this research title, this research article. Then this is how you probably want to structure your title construct when you're writing a title. So this part here, title, very, very important because it's kind of the way people will notice your work in the first place. Johan will talk about this later on when talking about Scopus searches and keywords, for instance. So next thing, ask yourself, who is the key author? People always ask this question all the time, right? What's the principles for the first author? First author is the one who actually conducted the research. They have done the data analysis, they've collated the data analysis, they've put together the paper, presented, and done the interpretation of the results. And they are the ones who have submitted the paper to the journal, i.e., the first author is the one who has done the brunt of the work, right? The co-author probably is responsible for intellectual contributions to data analysis and have contributed to data interpretation. They are responsible for reviewing each paper draft, right? And they must be able to present the results, to defend the implications, and to discuss the study limitations. So second author or co-authors, right? They are the ones who also have contributed to the work. They know what the work is about, but they're not the first author because, simply put, they are not the ones who are responsible for the overall combination of all the components in it. You have a share in it, but you have not contributed to the full thing, right? Abuses to be avoided here at this time. Very, very important in terms of an ethical perspective. Ghost authorship, very terrible when you leave out authors who should be included. Make sure when you contribute to a study, your name is actually in it, right? If not, then the first author or the person putting it together has done like a very gross infringement in terms of ethical rules. The next thing will be give authorship when you actually have given authorship to authors who have not contributed significantly to the work. Be very careful. So the abstract. The abstract is important because it's freely available in electronic abstract and indexing services like PubMed, Medline, Embase. I know in Indonesia, Scopus is used very, very largely as well and very active. So most of you probably know Scopus as well, right? Abstracts are important because, like the title, they are the advertisement of your article. You want to make it interesting and you need to be understood without reading the entire article. You need to be accurate and specific so that you can tell what has actually been done. A clear abstract would influence whether or not your article is considered. You want to make sure it's kept as brief as possible, and this is your opportunity to sell your article, right? At the same time, be very careful with the grammar in the abstract. So I've known editors who have rejected articles when the abstract had a couple of grammatical errors. Very simple, because the abstract is so important. If it shows that you have not correctly make sure that your abstract is grammatically correct, it shows that you probably have very little care, read rightly or wrongly, throughout the rest of your article. So be very, very, very careful when you're writing your abstract as well. Make sure it's grammatically correct. Keywords. This is also very interesting, right? In digital age right now, with the advent of the internet, on social media, and meta keywords, keywords are very important because they are used by indexing and abstract services. They are the specific labels of your manuscript, and you should only use established abbreviations like D and A. Check the guide for the authors, right? For the numbers, the labels, the definitions, and other special requests if necessary. One thing you may consider using is what we call the Google Adwords keyword tool. You can find out what keywords are the most popular in searches. Based on this information, you can decide on what keywords and synonyms you may want to use in your article title, your subheading, your description tags, your abstracts, and you want to repeat these keywords throughout the entire article itself. So using a strong keyword in your title is better than just only using it in the description tags, right? So for instance, you want to talk about keywords, talk about your keyword analysis, think about how you're using the metadata, think about what you're using to describe and to label your graphics, and how you're actually using this throughout social media. Be very careful. So why are keywords important? Right? You want to make your title short and use the keywords in the title. You want to link this throughout, you want to caption everything, you want to be consistent and use the keywords throughout the article so readers will find your paper, right? Use the subheadings and be very careful to choose your keywords carefully. So for instance, if you're talking about COVID-19 at the beginning, right, of 2020, this will have guaranteed you a lot of hits. But now with so much COVID-19 research going on, then you need to be more specific, right? What are the keywords which distinguishes your research from other things? Okay, this is the part where we hit the body, right? IMRAD, IMRAD. So introduction is very important because you want to provide context to convince readers that you know clearly why your work is useful. So first and foremost, be very brief when you're writing your introduction, and you want to actually clearly address the questions that you have at hand. Ask yourself, what is the problem? What are the aims of your research? Talk about the hypothesis. What is your hypothesis and what is the significance of your work? You want to talk about what has been done before, right? When it comes to the balanced literature, if you want to cite a couple of original and important works, if you want to include recent review articles. So one thing editors dislike would be many references which is irrelevant to the work itself or inappropriate judgments based on your own achievements. So very important, right? You want to be short, you want to be very thorough, you want to talk about what is the research question you want to tackle, what are your aims in terms of tackling it, and how your work can result in the world of scientific contribution. Talk about what you have done and what you have achieved. At the same time, right, align this with the aims and scope of the journal, which was another question that was raised that I could read and pass through in the meantime earlier on. The main body will be on methods. So talk about how the problem was studied. Talk about how you have identified the equipment and the materials that were used. You want to include detailed information that is also reproducible. At the same time, you do not want to describe previously published procedures, right? These are all things that you really need to factor in when you're using methods as well. Some of you in life and health sciences will talk about methods when it comes to ethical commitment, committee approval. So experiments on humans or animals must follow ethical rule standards, right? For instance, if you want to do human trial testing, you need to abide all this very, 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 very carefully. You need to have a required approval, and it needs to be specified in the manuscript, the cover letter, or the online submission system. And then editors can make their own decision based on ethics. And then there's a part where you talk about results, right? Talk about what you have found. Include any illustrations and figures that you think is very important. You want to include only data of primary importance. So sometimes you may have a lot of data, right? Perfectly justified, but you need to select the one that tells the most important story. Highlight the main findings of your research of your data, and the entire process needs to be clear and easy to be understood, right? This is very, very crucial as well when you want to present the information on your results. And then talk about the discussion. Discussion is so crucial here, okay? So firstly, one is the key interpretation of your results, of your research work. And now you get to sell your data, also very important. Then the discussion must correspond with the results. Needless to say, you cannot ignore work that disagree with yours. And it's a very common question. What happens if my results do not align with what has been presented previously, right? Someone has asked this question. Oftentimes, this is a point of concern. It's okay. It's okay to show that the work is different, but you need to have a caveat as to why the data is different. Because now you're able to showcase this research works in a specific area, in a specific context. My research worked in this specific area and this in the specific context, and it is okay to be different, right? And then now you can also be very honest and upfront. Discuss about the limitations of your research work. Talk about what you were not specifically able to achieve, or what were the limitations, and maybe this is actually a good way for you to develop a second piece of research similar to based on the findings of this current research. So you get to see how science can actually evolve and grow upon itself, right? And I would say compare published results with your own, because one, it shows awareness. Two, it shows that you're humble enough to be constructive about it. It's really the entire process here that's very, very crucial and important. And this part, after the discussion, then you may want to reach upon the conclusion. How the work advances the field from the present state of knowledge. You want to be clear, you want to justify your work in the research field, and then can suggest future experiments. So specifically in this case, in summary, we have demonstrated that the mercaptan acetamide-based HDACIs possess favorable solubility, lipophilicity, permeability, and plasma stability features as compared to recently FDA-approved drug Borinostat. So here we talk about the 5 research approaches and experiments that you have conducted, right, in terms of solubility tests, fat tests, permeability tests, and plasma stability tests, right? So you can say, based on these findings, we assume that the compounds can be sufficiently be absorbed by the intestinal tract. That's the long story short. And then now you can grow on it. However, further studies are needed in order to determine the pharmacokinetic disposition of these compounds. So you're taking this another step further, right, to show your awareness of the research. And this is how you can do it, and it's fantastic because now you're able to just put things clearly, shortly, and you're able to show how this research can be constructive. The references towards the tail end would ensure that you're able to cite the main scientific publications on which your work is based. You need to ensure you have absorbed the material which you have referenced. You don't want to use too many references. You want to avoid excessive self-citations, and you want to conform to the style in the Journal's Guide for Authors, right? These are some of the examples and the publications to showcase how your work is based. The acknowledgement ensures that those who have helped with the research are recognized, and you want to include individuals who have assisted you with your study, including advisors, financial supporters, proofreaders, and suppliers who may have provided you the materials needed to do your research. You want to be grateful, right? And this is your chance to be appreciative. And this is how the submission process is like, right? Your manuscript is submitted, sometimes it's very, very bare, but maybe after the peer review and revision, you'll be able to add on important components to it, like minor revisions, introductions, and discussions can be expanded. You can showcase more replicates. You can try another approach. This is actually how the submission process may actually help your research. One thing I need to actually emphasize, and I think is very, very crucial, please submit a cover letter with the manuscript. So don't underestimate the importance of a cover letter, which is addressed to the editor or the editor-in-chief of the journal you are submitting to. Write a cover letter, and this is a very important chance for you as an author to convince the editor that your research work is actually worth reviewing, right? This is a chance to speak to them. You want to talk about the theme of the paper, you want to argue for the uniqueness in the paper, and then you want to justify the relevance of the manuscript to the target journal itself, right? You want to avoid pasting portions of the abstract in the cover letter because this shows laziness, and really the cover letter is a great opportunity to talk to the person who will be accepting your paper, or to accept it, before submitting it for the peer review process. So one thing I would also say, talk about what makes your manuscript special to the journal, and you need to note any special requests here. For instance, if there are reviewers that you would like to recommend, or reviewers that you would not like to have, you want to talk about conflicts of interest as well. So people don't want to find out what is the conflicts of interest after it's been published. Let them know about it first so that you can highlight it beforehand. So let's take a look at this example, right, from this letter to Professor Schmidt. So you can see that in the introduction, you have enclosed within this letter, you'll find an electronic submission of a manuscript entitled Mechanosorptive Creep under compressive loading, which is a model by John Smith and myself. You can see that this is an original paper that's not been published before, and both authors have read and approved the final version submitted. Shows the final approval. We can talk about how the creep accelerates if it's the uniqueness of this research when it's subjected to a cyclic moisture content, and this shows the practicality for application in the paper industry. So you're able to talk about the importance of the research and the uniqueness of this, right? And now you can also suggest 3 potential independent reviewers who have the expertise in this area. And then thank you so much if you consider the manuscript for publication in the International Journal of Science, right? This is one of the examples that you can probably do and you can probably use when you're writing your cover letter. So before submission, check the manuscript as many times as you can before you submit it. Double, triple, quadruple, quintuple check it. And then ask colleagues and supervisors to review your manuscript to make sure everything is like all the components and elements are present, and if there are any other errors, maybe grammatical or otherwise. And then you submit your manuscript with a cover letter and you wait for a response. Okay, I'm going to give you a quick exercise, right? Once again, I'll give you maybe about 9 minutes. So at 4 p.m., you can probably share with me some of your answers that you have, because I know many of you with many questions right now. So maybe you can discuss with some of your peers in this chat room itself. Ask yourself, what is the criteria that you use to rate a journal, right? I have a lot of examples. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I want you to share with me one criteria that how you rate a journal. Explain briefly in 2 sentences why each criteria was chosen. And you can think of 1 to 2 journals that fit your criteria and why would you like to publish in these journals. So I'm going to give you maybe about 8 minutes now, all right? So at 4 p.m. Indonesia time, we will get back to you on this. So please feel free to think about this. How would you choose the right journal and why?
Choosing the right journal. How would you do it?
On the lower side, would it be wise to get them published in preprint service? I would say you could, but it also boils down to what is your purpose for getting your research to be published. If you find that even though it might be difficult in getting it published, you may want to find another journal who could provide you with constructive feedback that will publish your articles, because you want to make sure that your work is properly seen. Because after all, you have already put in your work and your effort in doing this research, so you might as well do it so that you can be recognized for the quality of the work which you have put in. So this is something which I would say. Preprint service, I understand they allow you to turn around the information faster, but you need to ask yourself, at the end of the day, you still want your work to be recorded properly in index databases. So you have to be patient about this. Another question that has come out along the way, if our manuscripts are planned to be published or submitted in Scopus, the authors must be many? No, it does not have to be many for your work to be indexed on Scopus. So normally people would encourage you to work with multiple authors internationally, because when it comes to research, international collaboration really makes a lot of sense. And the data has shown, broadly speaking, when you collaborate internationally, you are able to have an exchange of ideas, and this exchange of ideas would help to make the research more robust, right? So that's one reason which we always encourage authors to collaborate with one another. But for it to be published on Scopus, it is not a given that you have to do it with other authors. It's not. It's just that it's encouraged that you collaborate, because interdisciplinary research, collaborative research, they always tend to generate better ideas and flow, right? But of course, this is not a hard and fast rule. Okay, it's about 5 o'clock right now, and There's a plethora of answers on the chat that I would have to go through right now, so give me a second. Yes, I agree. First and foremost, not a predatory journal, and I'm very aware that when it comes to predatory journals, this is a very key issue that Indonesia faces. So we can talk about predatory journals later with Johan, and Johan will show you some tools and tricks on how you can identify a non-predatory journal, right, for instance. So I would say, yes, it's very important for you to know about one, impact factor, two, whether or not the journal is in an index journal on, say, Scopus or Web of Science, for instance. Another way you can rate a journal is through the impact factor or through the site score value on Scopus. What is the quality of the journal in the subject category? All this is very important as well. And of course, you need to allow and to see what's the align and see what's the aim and scope of the journal. So people tend to say citation counts. Yes, citations are important, but you always need to factor the citation count in a journal in, say, medicine is very different from the citation count from a journal in mathematics, for instance. So you want to be very careful when you're just looking purely on citation count. So my advice to you is please compare apples to apples, oranges to oranges. If you're comparing, say, mathematics journal, compare it to other maths journal, right, in the subject field. And sometimes mathematics or even, say, social sciences, they're such broad topics. Then you might want to go one step down and to identify the sub-discipline or the specific topic area for the journal itself. This gives you a better idea. Some of you have said use Journal Finder. That's pretty good. I agree. Some of you have decided to go with established publishers, and I'll say that's also good because now you're able to identify some of the key people and the key audience that you would like to engage with as well. Some of you, of course, related to the field study, which is what I said as well. Yep. You can use a qualitative report. Yes, that works. And these are very good answers. Most of you have gotten it right. And I would say that at the end of the day, and this is really what I have to say, don't just use one single metric to ascertain how good a journal is, because there's no one size fit all policy. When we're doing, say, an evaluation of a good journal, you want to use a combination of different factors, right? So, for instance, we talk about impact factor. We also talk about site score. Some of you might be talking about Saimago journal ranking like SJR, for instance. Sometimes you also want to understand what is the field of study. And even after you have done all this, you've done all this quantitative analysis, you also want to take a look at the qualitative analysis, right? What is the subject area? For instance, what's the aims and scope? All this really puts in together so that you're able to ascertain what's the quality of a journal that you can submit to. And this also ties in with something which Johan would present about later as well, which I think will be very useful. So in summary, aims and scope, you need to reach the intended audience for your work. You can only choose one journal as simultaneous submissions are prohibited, right? I've mentioned this before, I'm going to drive this through again. Make sure you submit this to one journal at a time. Sometimes speak to your peers or to your supervisors and your colleagues. They can provide good suggestions as well, right? Another one which I think is actually very useful, which is an editor from one of the Elsevier journals has told me. He shared that within a research community, there tends to be a couple of journals that you tend to gravitate towards because those journals are the best examples, right, on where you want to get your research to be published in, right? So if you're in energy, maybe you want to take a look at fuel. If you're, say, in genetics, biochemistry, you may want to gravitate towards Cell. If you're in medical, you may want to gravitate towards Lancet. These are some examples, right? And if you're engineering, maybe you want to go to an IEEE journal, for instance. There are always certain journals within your specific topic areas that would always be the ones producing the area of research. So if you feel that your research is really good, you want to share with the world, you should go for those journals which allows you to air your research in the best public platform. So you can also shortlist a handful of candidate journals and investigate them through aims, through the scopes, through the accepted type of articles, through the readership of the people who are reading it, which community is reading it, and of course, current hot topics. Also, we mentioned before, articles in your reference list will lead you directly to the right journals. So these are some of the bibliometric indicators that we have talked about: impact factor, eigen factor, SJR, Saramago journal rankings, SNP, as well as site score. Okay, so now I'm going to give you another perspective on what editors take a look at when they're evaluating the manuscript as well. We talked about that earlier. So first and foremost, ethically, is there plagiarism? If there's plagiarism, it's rejected straight away. You need to ask yourself, is the scope of the journal aligned with what I'm managing it? If it's not aligned, there is the possibility that there will be an article transferred to another subject area, but this does not always happen. You ask yourself, quality, is this of sufficient quality for the journal? And most of the time, the editors should be able to guide you on this as well, to recommend a transfer to another area. And it's only after all this has been done and cleared by the editor before the external peer review can be conducted. When it comes to plagiarism, there's many different softwares you can use, right? Like Turnitin, you can use cross-check. Some of you, and I will say, I'll leave it up to you on to ascertain which areas or which plagiarism software works the best for you. People would also say, what is the percentage for common plagiarism? I would say actually on average about 10% or less, right? Most of the time people would say, but my methods tend to be so similar with established methods. And I would say yes, because the concurrence and overlap in terms of methods is quite common, but you would still have to do your best in your own words to articulate how you have been able to conduct the research. So one other example I'm able to share is Professor Henk Buschke, who is the editor from Colloids and Surfaces Bs for Biointerfaces. We got him to speak to us actually on what are some of the things that he looks out for when he's doing his research. Title: does he understand what this paper is about? Is the article and research informative, and does it appeal to a large group of readers? Because a poorly chosen title is a missed opportunity to connect with the audience himself, right? And then you need to ask yourself, the abstract itself, very important. Is the abstract in line with the title of the research? Is the abstract indicative of the general significance of the research? Does it tell me the impact of what I'm looking at? What are the aims of the study that I'm looking at? What are the results? Are they described in sufficient detail? The conclusion, what's the broad perspective of this, right? So you need to excite me, and I want to read the introduction. So these are the title and the abstract because they are the start and the header of the article itself. Now look at the introduction. It's not about what you as the author knows, because it's not for you to show off your knowledge, because people would know about the knowledge. You want to talk about how it identifies gap in the current literature and how your work can fill in the gap, right? Shows the urgency to complete the gap, the novelty of your work, and how the paper would yield to fill in that gap. What is the aim of the study, right? Because now you need to really excite the reader to know that they want to finish reading this paper so that they know what they're missing out on. And then you can talk about figures and tables, right? Talk about clear standard deviations with explanations. So being an exact science journal, the data should not be of photographs, it should not be of micrographs or photographs of test tubes. The data should be data. It needs to showcase how it actually proves the information. And then it boils down to results and discussion, right? They want to see what data the author can add in terms of results, how it fits in, and how it advances the field. And the majority of the references should be to the field or to the journal itself. Okay, how can you deal with referee comments? This happens all the time, and it's not only just referee, but sometimes editor comments as well. Referee comments come in two huge categories: a major revision or a minor revision. The manuscript may be published in the journal, and there be significant deficiencies which has to be corrected before acceptance. And this involves significant textual modifications and or additional experiments. So don't worry, sometimes you may get a major revision. It doesn't mean that it's a full rejection. The fact that you receive a major revision shows that there is value in your research, but you need to work on this to make this even better. Conversely, when you receive a minor revision, it does not necessarily mean that your work will definitely be accepted. It shows that your work is worth being published, but you need to improve and clarify, restructure, or to shorten some elements in your manuscripts or to expand it. The minor revision does not guarantee acceptance after the revision, but oftentimes it's accepted if all the points are addressed. So the revision process requires two major documents. Firstly, the revised manuscripts needs to highlight the modifications made following the recommendations received from the reviewers. The second, you need to list the author's responses, illustrating that you have addressed all the concerns of the reviewers and the editors. So draft these documents very carefully. And I would say, yes, we are allowed, of course, to agree or to disagree with the comments of the reviewers, although we would say that agreement is usually encouraged. But you're not always obliged to always implement your recommendations. But in this case, when you disagree, please provide a very well argued justification for your course of action. I would say that you can disagree. You just need to be constructive, you need to be respectful, and show why is it that you disagree. And you need to be very judicious and careful about all this before it actually leads to acceptance. And what leads to acceptance? One, attentiveness to your details. Check, double check, triple check your work. Consider the reviewer's comments, don't just brush them aside, you need to address it. Your English must be written in a grammatically correct way as possible. Presentation is important with how you showcase the information, the data, the structure of your manuscript. Take your time with the revision, don't rush through it. Make sure you factor in all the considerations and the justifications and the recommendations. Acknowledge those who have helped you, right? You want to be thankful to your peers, to your mentors, to your advisors. You want to showcase new, original, and previously unpublished work. You want to critically evaluate your own manuscript, and you also want to obey ethical rules. All these are really important. And so I want to leave you with this now. We're not even like through the end yet, but I want to leave you with this image first. And some of you, may be able to empathize with this. It's not easy. We all know it's not easy to submit a manuscript. You think that everyone is out to get you, but not always. Before your paper is actually accepted. So one of the ways that I want to actually showcase to you is that to make sure that you're not the only one going through this, and this is really why I encourage writers to also be peer reviewers so that they can also factor in ethical considerations when they are doing their peer review, right? It really boils down to a few things: expertise, timeliness, seriousness, and avoid biasness. Expertise. When you're reviewing the manuscript, does this fall within your expertise? If it's not within your expertise, please leave it to someone else and you can decline to review. But this is why sometimes the review length gets extended. And also crucially, if you feel that you're not the correct person, but you know someone who has, recommend it to the editor. If you cannot return the review within the specific deadline, please reject it because you know that other people's research work would depend on this. As a peer reviewer, you need to always take it seriously because your review will really help the author to improve the quality of their research and to contribute to the overall quality of the journal itself. Avoid bias. Don't review a manuscript if you have a strong positive or negative feeling about the authors himself. Don't be intimidated by the task. Sometimes you shouldn't reject like, oh, I'm not ready yet, because when are we actually ever ready, right? So don't be intimidated. Sometimes you'll be asked to review because someone values your expertise in the field. It goes without saying that you need to respect the confidentiality of the research work. Don't talk about the manuscript, the results, or the methods with outsiders. You are not allowed to do that. It's not ethical, right? Because in a way, having you to peer review it is a mode of trust. So you need to really abide by it. Some people will ask about what are single blinds, double blinds, anonymous reviewers. All this really depends on the journal at hand. So some people would have a philosophical approach with regards to this. I would say every journal editor would have their own reasons for what they're doing. So one comment to peer reviewers, I want to also make your life better so that your trip through having your paper accepted would not be so scary. When reviewing, try to remember that you are an author as well. You want to be professional and constructive in your approach. You really should be there to help your community. And this sometimes may be difficult, right? But you should also not let your inner nitpicker get the upper hand. So the person who wrote this and commented on this is a Professor Stephen Curry. He is not the NBA player. He is a professor of structural biology from Imperial College of London. And to just, substantiate what I just said, you can find his Scopus ID here. Okay, and this is how your articles get accepted or rejected. And this falls back, to Elsevier's acceptance rate. We talk about, we get rejected 75% of the time, but we accept your articles 25% of the time. So I would say maybe it's not that rare. It can happen just 25% of the time. Then congratulations, celebrate. Get kicked for the department, wait for the page proofs, wait for your article, your accepted article manuscript to be online and in print. Right? So when you get rejected, probability 40 to 90, well, Elsevier 75% of the time, don't despair because it happens to everybody. The most important thing is that you really want to take a constructive approach, and that's my take in general, right? Try to understand why your article was rejected, see what the editor has said or what the peer reviewers have said, then be very critical. But doesn't mean that your research work does not have value, right? You need to see it. And then if you want to, when you submit your research work to another journal, take this like a new manuscript. Take advantage of the reviewer's comments, be constructive with it, improve on your research manuscript, on your research work, and then submit it to the journal, a new journal, right? When you submit it to the new journal, look at their guide for authors again and again, make sure that it's structured in the way you're looking for. It's not straightforward, it's not easy, rejection really sucks, but this is one of the things that you really need to, you can take a very proactive, constructive approach with regard to this. Towards the end here, the last part that I want to talk about, but also very, very, very crucial, is on publication ethics, right? Very important here. So there's a whole range of information that I want to cover right now. First and foremost, fabrication, falsification of data. There are many people who have been fabricated and falsified data. This is highly unethical because you've created research, right? So Elsevier was quite prominently featured recently when we had to retract an article from Lancet because we discovered that the article was falsified. So it doesn't mean that your article has been published, right? And therefore, it's good to go. People will find out. It's a very robust scholarly community that we have in the world today. We all know about fake news. We all know that when you put something that's not correct, people will correct you, right? So, which is why the entire peer review process is so sacrosanct, is so important, so crucial, which is why that the entire scholarly community would, in a way, support itself to make sure that information being shared is correct, right? That Lancet article happened when the community reacted and said this data does not feel correct. And then when it went up, our editors were able to say that yes, we have an area of expression of concern, and then there was a retraction because we realized that the information was not correct. All this will happen, and then the reputation, the smear reputation is actually humongous as well. So please avoid fabrication and falsification of data. That's something which I think everyone here knows is really serious. We also have plagiarism, and plagiarism comes in many forms, from passing off someone's paper as your own, to copying or paraphrasing large parts of research, to claiming results from research from others by yourself. Once again, the community itself will regulate itself, and this will be found out. So if you have not disclosed a conflict of interest, which is why the cover letter is so useful in this, if there are authorship issues with regards to ghost or give authorship, if there are duplicate publications, which is I mentioned again, please submit your work to only one journal at a time. And if you manipulate the peer review process through fake peer reviews, I'll talk about this later. So what can be plagiarized? A lot of things can be plagiarized. Words, ideas, findings, writings, representations, any other original work. So please attribute it to the original author. When we talk about conflicts of interest, it can come in many forms, like direct financial, in terms of employment in the company, stock options, grants, and patents, right? You need to declare all this upright and in front. Like indirect financial benefits like honoraria, consultancies, or fund ownerships, right? If you get promotion, or if it's with regards to a direct rival or with your own personal belief. The most important way to handle conflicts of interest is by being transparent and to disclose all this information upfront, right? Very important. full disclosure of the potential conflict with your cover letter to the journal editor. We mentioned about submitting your manuscripts to one journal at a time, right? You also want to avoid multiple redundant or concurrent publication issues, right? So that the situation can be avoided when manuscripts which describes the same research are published in more than one journal. The duplication of the same paper in multiple journals of different languages should also be avoided. And at the same time, we have salami slicing. Most of you probably heard about this. When you create several publications from the same research, this is highly manipulative. It has to be discouraged, right? One of the things that you should be very aware of. People say that, but it's different components of it. You know, if it's so unique, but the whole thing is that if you're able to find results that are so unique, then it can stand alone as an individual research upon itself. We also have observed fake peer review processes. So we have come across cases where journals itself, this is very interesting, I would say, the submission has created identities of fake peer reviewers with fake email addresses where they have reviewed the paper to say that it's worth being considered to be published. So this has to be very careful. It will be found out, and then you will have to retract studies in this case. This actually has happened before. Sharing guidelines, this is interesting. So people have been talking about preprint, right? Preprint is very interesting, especially if you're doing research in COVID-19 in this day and age, because there's so much research going on right now. So the good thing about preprint is that you can share your preprint anywhere at any time. The concern here is the data correct? Is the data factual? Has it been peer reviewed? They have not. So question is, depends on the urgency of the research which has to be produced. I've met a researcher from Malaysia who shared with me his concerns about the sheer volume of research on preprints. And the trouble here is you don't know what is correct, right? And do you have to go through the process of verifying all this information from scratch? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on how urgent your request for this data is. So this is one of the concerns about preprints which I've heard from directly. When it comes to accepted manuscript, if accepted for publication, authors should link from the preprint to their formal publication via the DOI. So millions of researchers have access to the formal publications on Science Direct, and the links will help your users to find, access, cite, and use the best available version of this. Authors can update your preprints or either archive or repack with the accepted manuscript. On Elsevier, Elsevier will send you a share link when your article is published, and this is a personalized link that provides free access to your article for 50 days, and you can share this with your peers and your colleagues on Science Direct, on email, on Twitter, on Facebook, online, for instance. Sometimes you also want to share your link to your article rather than the full text, right? We don't allow the final PDFs on ResearchGate or SciHub, and this is something that you should really be careful about when you're sharing published links. Some of you may be using lay summaries and you want to submit lay summaries for funding application. You can publish this on your website or your blog. You can share on social media. You can send this to your press office or the communications team. And part of the lay summary would include 250 to 400 words with short sentences of 20 to 30 words with a short paragraphs to 2 to 3 sentences. So for instance, these two examples. This was the original research article on a bumpy road maximizing the value of a resource corridor, published in the Journal of the Extractive Industries and Society. So you can see over here, the lay summary is published on, Facebook. You can see this, that on Adam Smith International, our expert looked at maximizing the value of resource corridors. So other researcher tools that we would like to share with you today, and I think it's really, really good. First and foremost, the Elsevier Researcher Academy. So this is a free-to-use platform. It's a bit like Coursera. It's an online platform which takes you through the different phases of the research cycle, from the beginning of research preparation to the publishing process to the demonstration of impact. And this prepares PhDs and postdoctorates for their careers either inside or outside of academia. You can get funding for your research, and this is completely free. You get information like funding, research data management, research collaborations under research preparation. You can write for research by showing the writing skills, and book writing showcases the publication process, how you can navigate peer review, and how you can communicate your research. And these are some examples of the topics that I have at hand. Some of you have pointed out about Journal Finder. I'm glad you guys actually know about this. So Journal Finder is also another free resource that Elsevier has developed. so that as a researcher, you can find journals that are best suited for publishing your scientific article. Go to journalfinder.elsevier.com. It uses a smart search technology to match your article to Elsevier journals. Johan will talk to you about this in more detail as well and how you can get details for this. We also have Elsevier Journal Insights, which talks about the insights for each journal. So you can find information like impact, like site score, impact factor, article influence, SNP, SJR. You can find out how long the article takes to be published and the reach of the article itself. For those of you who want to know more information, right, about being an author, about being a reviewer, about being an editor, here are some more examples that I'm very happy to share with you so that you can browse through this. These are additional reading or more homework depending on how you look like so that you can find out more information about how you can be a better reviewer. So at this point in time, I've spoken for a long time, for maybe about 2 hours, but I'd like to pass the floor over to Johan so that he can moderate a quick Q&A session before he presents. So over to you, Johan.
Oke, thank you Nick. Nah, Bapak Ibu semuanya yang masih memiliki pertanyaan-pertanyaan, silahkan memberikan pertanyaannya di bagian Q&A dan kita akan jawab beberapa pertanyaan. Nah, setelah Q&A ini, ya masih ada satu sesi singkat lagi dari saya yang akan lebih banyak menjelaskan mengenai tools yang bisa Bapak Ibu nanti gunakan ketika melakukan kegiatan penelitian. Tapi sebelumnya kita lihat dulu di bagian Q&A, ada beberapa pertanyaan yang sepertinya sudah bisa kita jawab secara live. Okay, Nick, so probably I'm going to see here from the list of questions and then, yeah, you can answer some of them. I would start. This one is using Bahasa Indonesia, but I'm going to try to translate this one, which because I think this is very important as well. It's about proofreading. So when the researchers trying to submit the research article to Elsevier journal, the editor asks for proofreading, and is this something quite common that we usually will find when we try to submit this our research article to Elsevier journals?
I would say it really depends on the nature of the study. So this is actually one of the rare times I've actually heard that we required the proofreading. So I'm not sure what the editor of the journal, was it the publisher or was it the editor of the journal who asked that, I assume? Yeah. It really depends on what the editor and what's the scope of the study that's being asked from. So I can't say for certain.
This one I think is also interesting. So I have submitted my full paper article for a call of abstract, but then it was rejected. So I'm trying to submit it for another journal. My question is, do I need to state in the new submission that the abstract has been rejected before?
I would say that it would make sense to come close with full transparency, but you should put this in the cover letter, and then I would say that you can prove and say that what are the changes that has been made from the previous iteration that has been submitted, because sometimes you also want to show that this has been augmented and improved in a certain way as well. So now you have full transparent disclosure, you're able to showcase how and what improvements have been made.
Okay. So another question, is it a good practice to publish in a journal from an article that previously appeared in conference?
It depends on what the subject and how that information has been fleshed out and developed. So conference proceedings would showcase initial findings earlier because that's the urgency.
Intinya dari apa yang akan saya share hari ini, ya. Nah, toolsnya ada apa saja? Nah, yang pasti gini, what we know so far dari penjelasan Nicholas tadi, banyak ya Bapak Ibu. Kita menulis ketika kita ingin publik, harus cukup banyak ya, agar tulisan kita itu lebih dapat diterima, ya, tidak langsung di-reject, dan tulisan kita juga kita tahu jurnal mana yang kemudian tepat untuk mempublikasikan penelitian kita, ya. Nah, jadi banyak memang tadi hal-hal yang sudah di-share oleh Nicholas, dan tentunya materi tersebut akan kita share setelah sesi ini, ya. Nah, Bapak Ibu, yang pasti gini, bahwa seluruh